The frontier was built on blood and justice. Subscribe and relive the untamed West. The wind howled across the New Mexico plains like a wounded wolf, carrying dust, the faint smell of gunpowder, and the echo of dying men. The sun bled low on the horizon, turning the world into a red haze. Among the scattered corpses and smoldering wagons, one rider sat tall on a black horse, his face half hidden beneath a shadowed hat, eyes cold as the desert stone. His name was Jesse Evans. No one remembered where he was born exactly. Some said Missouri, others whispered Texas, but everyone who met him remembered one thing. He was faster than death and twice as quiet. He rode with the Seven Rivers Gang, a band of outlaws who worked for whoever paid the most, ranchers, smugglers, even politicians. They called themselves Cowboys, but they were killers in dust coats, hired to fight the Lincoln County War. It was supposed to be about land and cattle. It turned into something else entirely. That morning, before the blood was spilled, Jesse had sat by the fire sharpening his Colt. The metal hissed softly against the whetstone. Around him, the men joked, drank whiskey, and loaded rifles. Frank Baker, a big man with a missing ear, spat into the fire. "You reckon Murphy's boys'll show, Jess?" "They always do," Jesse said flatly. "Greed makes men punctual." When the shooting started, there was no warning, just the sound of a rifle cracking the dawn apart. Horses screamed, men dove for cover, and the air filled with smoke and curses. Jesse moved through it like a ghost, firing once, twice, each shot a clean execution. He didn't yell or curse, he didn't have to. The men around him followed his silence like a command. By the time the gunfire died, 6 men lay dead, and the Seven Rivers Gang had driven off a herd of stolen cattle. Blood soaked the sand. Jesse dismounted, looked at the bodies, and muttered, "Guess that's justice in this country." He wasn't smiling. He never did. Later, when the gang rode into Lincoln, they were greeted not as murderers but as hired saviors. The ranchers cheered them. The saloon doors swung open. Whiskey flowed. A woman with dark hair and sharp eyes slid a glass toward Jesse. "You, the quiet one they call Evans." He nodded. "They say you kill like you're praying," she said. He looked up slowly. "Maybe I am." That night, as the laughter and fiddle music drowned out the screams that haunted his mind, Jesse slipped out back. The stars stretched endless above him, cold and indifferent. He lit a cigarette, staring into the dark. He'd been 17 when he first killed a man, a ranch foreman who'd whipped him bloody for stealing bread. The man, S. Gunn, had barely cleared his holster before Jesse S. shot him clean between the eyes. No rage, no fear, just necessity. Since then, death had followed him like a loyal dog. In the months that followed, Jesse's name spread across the frontier like wildfire. Some called him a hero of the range fighting corrupt landowners. Others swore he was the devil's own son. But Jesse didn't care what stories they told. He knew truth didn't matter out here, only reputation did. He rode for Murphy's faction during the Lincoln County War, burning ranches, running men off their land. When the fighting ended, Jesse's gang vanished into the desert, leaving behind ashes, graves, and whispers. The war had made him rich and hollow. One night, in a lonely saloon near Las Cruces, he met Billy the Kid for the first time. The kid was younger, sharper, with that wild grin that could charm snakes. They shared whiskey and a silence that felt almost like brotherhood. Billy laughed, tapping his revolver. "World's changin', Jesse. Someday they'll call us the bad guys." Jesse sipped his drink. "They already do." When dawn came, the 2 men rode separate ways. History would remember Billy the Kid. Jesse Evans would fade into rumor. By 1880, most of his gang were dead or hung. Jesse drifted south into Mexico, working as a hired gun. The violence followed him still. Train raids, border killings, drunken shootouts. Each left another ghost in his wake. But there was something changing in him. Maybe it was age. Maybe the weight of the faces that haunted his sleep. He started writing letters to a preacher in Las Cruces, letters that spoke of sin, redemption, and fear. No one ever answered. In the winter of 1882, he rode back into New Mexico, alone. The country was colder now, quieter. Railroads had come, and men in suits talked about law. Jesse didn't belong in that world anymore. He stopped at a saloon outside Pecos. The barkeep stared at him like he'd seen a ghost. "Thought you were dead, Evans." "Maybe I am," Jesse said, dropping a silver coin on the counter. Outside, the wind rose again, sweeping across the plains like it carried every soul Jesse had ever killed. He looked out into the endless distance, the same direction he'd been riding his whole life. No one knew what happened after that night. Some said he was ambushed on the border. Others claimed he changed his name and lived as a ranch hand until the end of his days. But one old man, years later, swore he saw him riding under a blood-red sky, still wearing that black hat, still silent as the grave. Maybe the frontier never really buried its ghosts. Maybe it just forgot their names. And somewhere in the dust and wind the whisper remains, Jesse Evans was here. The year was 1880, and New Mexico was changing. The towns were growing, railroads cut through open range like veins of iron, and men in polished boots spoke of law and progress. But out in the canyons, where dust swallowed the sun and justice was just another rumor, Jesse Evans still rode, a ghost clinging to a world that no longer wanted him. He'd been living under different names, drifting between ranches and border towns. Some called him Jess Howard, others the Gentleman Outlaw. But every time he tried to stay, the old blood found him. There was always someone who recognized his eyes, cold, calm, and too quiet for a working man. One night he rode into Fort Sumner, the same town where Billy the Kid was hiding out. The saloon was half empty, smoke curling in the air, the piano silent. When Jesse walked in, heads turned. The bartender froze mid-pour. At the far end of the bar, a young man with a lazy grin looked up. "Well, I'll be damned," Billy said, his voice easy but his hand close to the holster. "If it ain't Jesse Evans, the ghost himself." Jesse nodded, stepped closer. "Heard you're making quite a name for yourself, kid." Billy grinned wider. "Takes one to know one. Folks say you taught me half of what I know." Jesse took a long look at him. "Then I should have taught you when to stop." They laughed, but it wasn't real laughter. Two men on the same road, too far gone to turn back. Billy leaned forward. "Tell me, Jess, you ever get tired of it? The killing?" Jesse stared at his whiskey. "You don't get tired of breathing." Outside, thunder rolled over the plains. Inside, the silence thickened. Billy's men watched closely, waiting for something to break. But nothing did. Jesse finished his drink, nodded once, and walked into the rain. That was the last time the two legends ever met. Weeks later, Billy the Kid would be shot by Sheriff Pat Garrett, a clean bullet in the dark. When Jesse heard the news, he was camped by a river south of Las Cruces. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Guess even ghosts can die." From then on, Jesse became a shadow that haunted the edges of history. He stopped riding with gangs, stopped robbing banks. But the world wouldn't forget him. Every new marshal, every deputy looking to make a name, came hunting for the outlaw who wouldn't die. Posters with his face appeared in dusty post offices. Jesse Evans, wanted, dead, or alive. He tore one down once, stared at it. The sketch was crude, the eyes wrong. "That ain't me," he muttered, and burned it with his match. By spring, he'd taken work guarding cattle for a ranch near Roswell. The owner was a widowed woman named Mary Dalton, strong and kind in a way the frontier rarely allowed. She didn't ask about his past, he didn't volunteer it. At night, they'd sit on the porch watching lightning crawl across the plains. "You've got a quiet soul, Mr. Evans," she said once. He looked down at his hands, scarred and hard. "Quiet's the only thing I got left." But trouble always rode faster than peace. One afternoon, a group of bounty hunters arrived. 3 men, rough and hungry-looking. They claimed to be passing through, but Jesse knew the look in their eyes. The youngest one, maybe 19, couldn't stop staring at him. That night, when the others slept, Jesse heard boots crunch outside the cabin. He slipped from bed, revolver in hand. The boy was waiting by the corral, shaking, a pistol aimed his way. "You're Jesse Evans," he stammered. "There's a bounty, $500. Jesse didn't answer. He just stared at him, the way a man looks at his own grave. "Son," he said softly, "you don't want to do this." The boy fired, missed by inches. Jesse's gun barked once. The boy fell backward into the mud, eyes wide, life spilling out with the rain. For a long moment, Jesse stood there, the smoke drifting from his gun. Then he whispered, "Didn't even want the money." He buried the boy before dawn, hands trembling as he shoveled the wet earth. When Mary came out, she saw his silhouette in the gray light, the outlaw who had killed 100 men crying over one. He left that morning without a word. From then on, Jesse's trail went cold. Some said he crossed into Mexico again. Others said he was captured by the Texas Rangers, sent to prison, then released. But no one really knew. What is known is this. In 1882, a man calling himself Charles Everett was arrested in Presidio, Texas. He fit Jesse's description exactly. Cold eyes, scar above his brow. When asked his name, he smiled faintly and said, "Name's gone with the wind." A few months later, the man vanished from custody. No record, no grave, nothing. The newspapers called it the disappearance of Jesse Evans. But the old-timers around Pecos still swear that years after, they'd see a lone rider at dusk, hat pulled low, black duster flapping in the wind, heading west where the sun dies slow. Some say he found redemption. Others say he was still running from his own shadow. Either way, the plains kept his secret, and as long as there's dust and silence in the west, the ghost of Jesse Evans will never truly be gone. By 1883, Jesse Evans had become more story than man. His name drifted across the territories like campfire smoke, thin, restless, and half-believed. There was always someone who swore they'd seen him, somewhere between the desert wind and a whiskey bottle. In Fort Stanton, a ranch hand claimed a stranger helped him fight off cattle thieves before vanishing into the canyons. In Las Cruces, an old preacher said a man in black knelt in the back pew every Sunday, never speaking, just listening. And in Pecos, children dared each other to walk the old trails at night, saying, "Jesse rides there when the moon's low, looking for the law that never found him." The newspapers kept printing theories. "Evans dead in Mexico gunfight," one read. "Outlaw turned hermit in Texas hills," said another. But there was never a body, never proof. The truth, like the man himself, refused to stay still. One summer, a young Pinkerton agent named Elias Crane rode out west, chasing ghosts and glory. He carried Jesse's old wanted poster in his saddlebag and the fire of ambition in his eyes. To him, catching Jesse Evans, dead or alive, meant a career, maybe even legend. Crane followed every rumor, every whisper. He rode through ghost towns and dust storms, slept in barns, questioned old drifters. Most laughed him off. But one night in a border cantina, he met a scarred Mexican vaquero who leaned close and whispered, "You looking for Jesse Evans? He don't want to be found, senor. He's out there, between the rivers, but he ain't the same man." When Crane asked what that meant, the man only smiled. "Some ghosts keep riding till they find peace." Weeks later, Crane found himself deep in the Chihuahuan desert, following tracks that seemed to appear and vanish with the wind. One night, camped beneath the stars, he woke to the sound of hooves. A lone rider approached slowly, a black horse, a man in a dark coat. The figure stopped a few yards away. The firelight caught his face, weathered, scarred, but calm. "You're a long way from home, son," the man said. Crane gripped his revolver. "You, Jesse Evans?" The stranger's eyes met his, gray, hollow, tired. "Used to be." They sat in silence for a moment, only the fire crackling between them. Crane swallowed hard. "There's a price on your head." "There's always a price on something," Jesse said. "Ain't you learned that yet?" The wind rose, lifting sparks into the dark. Crane hesitated, finger twitching near his gun. But Jesse didn't move. He just stared into the fire, voice low and worn. "Boy, you think catching me makes you a hero? Ain't no heroes out here. Just men who lived long enough to be hated." Crane's heart pounded. He couldn't pull the trigger. Something in those words, something old, true, and heavy, rooted him to the ground. When he finally looked up, the rider was gone. Only hoof prints leading west, fading into the sand. He followed them until dawn. They ended at the edge of a dry riverbed. Then nothing. No body, no tracks. Just the whisper of wind through sagebrush, and a single spent bullet lying in the dust. Crane returned east a year later, broken and quiet. When asked what happened, he said only, "I found him," and he was already gone. After that, Jesse Evans became a myth, the last gunslinger who refused to die, a symbol of a world that was fading, swallowed by law and barbed wire. In time, people forgot the wars, the blood, the fear. They remembered only the legend, the man who rode into the desert and never came back. But history has a way of keeping score. In 1902, a rancher near Alamogordo discovered a weathered grave on his land, unmarked except for a piece of wood burned with the initials. J.E. Inside lay a rusted Colt. .45, its handle carved with a small cross. No records, no name, just silence. The local sheriff ordered it left alone. "Some men earned their rest the hard way," he said. Years later, an old-timer at a saloon in Roswell told a story to whoever would listen. He said that when he was a boy, he saw a man ride through town during a storm. Hat pulled low, coat flapping, lightning flashing behind him. "He looked like he was made of dust and memory," the old man said. "And when I asked my pa who it was, he said, 'That's Jesse Evans. The law never caught him. The world just gave up.'" No one knew if it was true. But in the deserts of New Mexico, when the wind blows just right, travelers swear they can still hear hoofbeats, steady, deliberate, echoing through the canyons. Some say it's just the wind. Others say it's Jesse, still riding, still chasing the peace he never found. Maybe he's still out there, watching the land that made him, the land that forgot him. A shadow stitched to the horizon, a name carried by the wind. Jesse Evans, the outlaw who disappeared, the ghost who never stopped riding. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth as Jesse Evans rode south, the desert wind biting at his face. The year was 1882, and rumors of his name were whispered from New Mexico to El Paso. A ghost with a revolver, a man who once rode with Billy the Kid but outlived the legend. He had grown harder, quieter, the weight of blood and betrayal pressing down on his soul like a hangman's noose. Jesse wasn't riding for gold or glory anymore. He was riding for answers, and, perhaps, redemption. The trail had led him to a small town called Dry Creek, a forgotten speck of dust that seemed to rot under the sun. There, a saloon keeper named Maggie knew something. She'd seen a man named Sloan, a former sheriff turned bounty hunter, bragging that he'd caught the last of the Kid S gang. Jesse knew that meant one thing. They were hunting him. That night, Jesse walked into the saloon, the wooden doors creaking like they knew his name. The piano stopped mid-tune, and every pair of eyes turned toward him. He was leaner now, older, but still carried himself like a man who owned the shadows. The room went silent as his boots echoed across the floor. "I'm looking for a man named Sloan," Jesse said, his voice cold as gunmetal. Maggie's eyes flicked toward the corner. A group of rough-looking men played cards, and one of them, thick beard, scar over his eye, froze. Sloan. Before words could be exchanged, the man reached for his revolver. But Jesse was faster. The Colt cleared leather, thunder cracked inside the saloon, and Sloan fell backward, a red bloom spreading across his chest. The crowd erupted in chaos. Jesse grabbed the ledger from Sloan's coat, names, locations, bounty amounts. At the bottom, one name burned like a brand. Jesse Evans. Dead or alive? That was the moment he realized there was no going back. He'd been outlawed not by choice but by history. The same lawmen who had once ridden beside him now wanted him buried. The same country that had turned boys like him into killers now called him a monster. As Jesse rode out of Dry Creek that night, the flames of the burning saloon behind him lit up the desert sky. He didn't look back. Somewhere out there, men were hunting him. Men he used to call brothers. He'd face them all, not because he wanted to live, but because he refused to die forgotten. He camped under a cold, indifferent sky, the crackle of the fire whispering memories of his past, the Lincoln County War, the kids' laughter, the smell of gunpowder and betrayal. The West was dying, he thought. The open plains were closing, and the law was no longer made by men with dust on their boots, but by men in offices wearing clean suits. But for Jesse Evans, the old rules still applied. "If a man comes for me," he muttered to the flames, "he best bring God with him." The next morning he rode toward Fort Stanton, toward the ghosts of his own making. The desert was quiet that morning. Too quiet for Jesse's liking. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as he approached the burned-out shell of Fort Stanton. Once a symbol of authority, now just ruins and echoes. The fort had seen soldiers, outlaws, and ghosts, and now it was about to see blood again. Jesse dismounted, tying his horse under the dying shade of a mesquite tree. He moved like a shadow through the rubble. The place smelled of ash and old gunpowder. Every step crunched over spent shells and broken glass. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Maybe a lead, maybe closure. All he knew was that the answers he sought were buried here, somewhere between the past and the lies that had built his legend. From inside one of the collapsed barracks, a voice drifted out. "You're late, Evans." Jesse froze. The voice was deep, familiar, a ghost from another life. Out of the shadows stepped a man wearing a black duster, a Remington resting loose in his hand. His face was older, lined with years, but his eyes still carried that cruel confidence Jesse remembered all too well. It was Captain Harmon, the same officer who, D, once hired Jesse S. Gang as scouts during the Lincoln County War, and the same man who D sold them out for reward money when the war ended. "I thought you were dead," Jesse said flatly. Harmon smirked. "I was. Then I decided to come back to collect what's mine." He tossed a folded poster at Jesse's feet. It was weathered, but clear enough. Jesse Evans. Wanted for murder, robbery, and treason. The bounty had doubled since Dry Creek. "You're worth more alive," Harmon said. "But dead's fine, too." Jesse didn't answer. His eyes traced the edges of the ruined walls, calculating angles, distances, cover. The silence stretched thin, heavy as a noose. Then, before either man could blink, it broke. Gunfire split the air. Harmon's men, hidden on the ridge, opened fire, bullets ricocheting off stone. Jesse dove behind a crumbled wall, returning shots in tight, measured bursts. Each pull of the trigger was deliberate, deadly. One man dropped, another screamed. Dust and gun smoke swallowed the ruins like a shroud. Then came the sound of boots closing in. 3 men, circling from the left. Jesse ducked low, grabbed a burning beam from the rubble and flung it toward a wagon of gunpowder left behind. The explosion ripped through the fort, shaking the ground. 2 of the bounty hunters vanished in the blast. Through the haze, Harmon stumbled forward, firing wild. A bullet grazed Jesse's arm, but he didn't stop. He stepped out of the smoke, eyes burning with something darker than rage. Resolve. "You think you can bury me?" Jesse growled. Harmon's revolver clicked empty. His eyes widened just as Jesse fired. The captain fell backward into the dust, his blood mixing with the ashes of the fort he once commanded. Jesse stood there a moment, breathing hard, gun still smoking in his hand. Around him, the world was silent again. No lawmen, no witnesses, just the echo of vengeance. He knelt beside Harmon's body and pulled a small notebook from the man's coat. Inside were names, sheriffs, marshals, even government men, all paid to erase the old outlaws of the Lincoln County War. It wasn't justice, Jesse realized. It was cleanup. History was being rewritten by men who'd never drawn a gun in their lives. He stuffed the notebook into his coat and mounted his horse. The fort burned behind him, flames licking the sky. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He just rode on, toward the horizon, where the line between myth and man disappeared into the dust. By the time night fell, Jesse Evans had become more than a fugitive. He was an idea, a whisper in the saloons, a shadow in the desert wind. Some said he'd vanished into Mexico. Others claimed they'd seen him riding under the moon, forever chasing the truth that had betrayed him. But for Jesse, there was only one truth left. No man could erase what he'd done, and no law could cage a ghost. The desert night stretched wide and endless, a black sea of silence beneath 1,000 stars. Jesse Evans rode through it like a shadow that refused to die. His horse moved steady, the faint clink of metal and creak of saddle leather the only sounds in the dark. Somewhere behind him, Fort Stanton was still burning, a pyre for the dead, a warning for the living. He didn't know where he was headed. Maybe Mexico, maybe nowhere. Every outlaw reached that point, the place where running stopped making sense, where the ghosts caught up. The wind carried voices sometimes, or maybe just memories. Billy's laugh, the cries of men he'd shot, the voice of Harmon calling his name before the bullet ended him. He stopped by a shallow creek, the moon's reflection rippling across the water like liquid silver. He dismounted and crouched, washing the blood from his hands. The notebook he took from Harmon sat heavy in his pocket. Inside, it was the truth, that the world had moved on without men like him, that justice had become a ledger, not a code. He flipped it open one last time. Dozens of names, all crossed out, but at the bottom, one name remained. His own. He took a pencil stub from his coat and drew a single line through it. "No more," he whispered. "You can't hang a ghost." The next morning, riders found the creek, the ashes of a small campfire, boot prints leading toward the mountains, but no horse, no man, no body, just a Colt revolver left neatly on a rock, sunlight glinting off its barrel. That's when the stories began. Some said Jesse rode south and vanished into Mexico, where he lived out his days as a rancher under a false name. Others claimed he joined a revolution, fighting for freedom in someone else's war. And a few swore they saw him years later. Older, slower, but with the same steel in his eyes, sitting at a saloon in Pecos, telling tales to men too young to remember the Lincoln County War. But most believed what suited them best, that Jesse Evans had disappeared into the desert, swallowed whole by the land that had birthed him. Maybe he'd found peace. Maybe he'd become something more than a man. The legend grew with each retelling. The outlaw who erased his own name. The ghost who refused to hang. To some, he was a murderer. To others, a symbol. Proof that justice was not born in a courthouse but carved in the dust by men who'd been forgotten by it. And in every saloon where men with guns still gathered, someone would whisper, "They say Jesse Evans didn't die. He just stopped needing to live." The wind would shift, the door would creak, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like the Gentleman Outlaw was still out there, somewhere beyond the horizon, still riding, still free. Because legends never die. They just ride off before the credits roll. If you love stories of forgotten gunslingers, redemption, and the ghosts of the Old West, don't forget to follow our channel. We bring the legends back to life. One bullet, one outlaw, one untold story at a time.